Newkah reviews.
Ooh, that's kind of small. Yikes.
Crypt of the Serpent King, despite its low price, is not worth purchasing under any circumstance. This Steam asset flip dumpster fire of a video game somehow managed a console release, assumedly via a back alley drug deal with, or violent extortion of, Microsoft executives. Despite having only 7 levels and a 2 hours length, Crypt of the Serpent King manages to be a grueling experience. This is largely because of the combat system, or lack thereof. The vast majority of enemies in the game have a single attack which loops endlessly. Upon learning the basic rhythm of an enemy's attack, there being only one enemy type per level, and as just established, a single attack animation per enemy, you have essentially already won the entire section. That's just when you can even be bothered to fight enemies, as it's substantially more viable, faster, and enjoyable even, to simply strafe jump around them. This is if you're not just luring enemies to the game's many death pits, from which you can kill hordes of Unity assets or monsters from an unassailable distance. Of course, you are often spared this rather minor effort, as seemingly endless foes will simply commit mass suicide when faced with the existential threat of the easily jumped gap. Notably, there is one moderately difficult level in the game, the second one. In this level, there are enemies, or enemy rather, with multiple different attacks, making the combat somewhat more interesting and substantially more difficult. In addition to this, the level lacks any death pits at all, disallowing exploitation of the special needs AI. Despite these improvements, this level revealed to me the laziest aspect of Crypt of the Serpent King, an aspect which cemented it to me as a cash grab rather than a humble passion project. Beyond attack noises, enemies make no sound whatsoever. No footsteps, no growling, no speech, nothing. So you can get surprise ganked and instantly die, as can be seen in this clip.
What the fuck was that?
In a good medieval fantasy game, such as the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, enemies constantly make callouts which prevents them from getting an unfair advantage through inadvertent stealth. Another game, Rainbow Six Vegas, similarly uses these callouts to great effect, preventing unfair deaths and accommodating the innately restrictive first-person perspective. Enemies in Crypt of the Serpent King, meanwhile, are apparently world-class assassins personally trained by Corvo, Attano, and Ezio Auditore. This is not to say they are in any way challenging or interesting to fight. They are simply incredibly difficult to detect if you're already engaged with a fight with another enemy. The laziness and ineptitude of not including something as basic as footstep sounds is simply astounding. What you're left with after dealing with the bargain bin Steam Greenlight creatures is the menial chore work of collecting keys and beating an either comically inept or infuriatingly broken boss. This boss in particular is incredibly irritating to deal with, as it attacks too fast to ever consistently counter. I could not avoid taking damage in this section despite having maxed agility and possessing the striking range of an 11-foot medieval polearm. Oddly enough, this broken, awful fight is actually better than any other in the game. This is because it actually does something interesting and creates somewhat of a panic scenario, which is incredibly exciting against the backdrop of expired Wonder Bread that is the rest of the experience. I had to think on my feet, switch to my bow, and strike from a distance, before landing a final angry blow with my polearm. Rather than custom making levels by hand, the devs at RenderCode Games instead opted for randomly generated levels. This would be fine if these randomly generated levels had any amount of interesting variety, beyond identically sized key and boss rooms connected by hallways. In a good randomly generated dungeon crawler, such as the contemporary classic Pixel Dungeon, there is an excellent variety of rooms, items, and enemies, which makes the environment substantially more interesting to explore when compared with the incredibly bland and repetitive environments of Crypt of the Serpent King. The only items you can find in Crypt of the Serpent King's randomly generated levels are gold, and if on a lower difficulty than hard, food as well. In between levels, you can invest experience points into the stats of strength, endurance, and agility, in addition to various weapons which are acquired with gold. There are no classes, races, genders, skills, dialogue sections, or party mechanics to speak of. You can't even name your character. The effects of leveling that are here are so negligible as to be hardly noticed in combat, to the extent that if I were told they actually did nothing at all, I would believe it. Had the game used the old RPG trick of using a few consistent enemies as to inform the player on their progress, i.e., enemy variety, this would have felt like a much more rewarding system. With how underdeveloped the gameplay is, perhaps the developers were focusing on crafting an interesting, complex, and engaging story. That would be great if the game had any story at all. There is no explanation of who the player character is. There is no explanation of who the enemies are. And there is no explanation, beyond his name, of who the Serpent King is. Aside from the Serpent King, there is not a single character in the entire game. Even a paragraph-long text box thrown in before the first level would have sufficed in giving the player any idea of what's going on at all or who we are. Overall, the game is bad not only because of its obviously low budget, but because the developers simply didn't care. They have had 7 years to make major improvements to the horrendous gameplay experience and have done nothing. A great game can be made with a minimal budget and development team. Look at Minecraft, Mount and Blade, I Divine Cybermancy, or War Sim. This game had more than enough potential to be a decent dungeon crawler, but instead we got this.
Holy Jesus. What is that? What the fuck is that?
And we knew
This is not okay. This needs to stop now. This is cancer. This is so much cancer that I can feel the tumors growing on my back. And it's way down heavy on me, and it's not okay.